Hi, my name is Barney and welcome to another video. In one of my previous videos, I've been checking out my i7-3770k, which you can watch here, but unfortunately that time it was on a B75 motherboard which did not allow to overclock. Since then, I have ordered a Z77 motherboard from AliExpress, and after a short period of 3 weeks of waiting, it arrived to my doorstep. So I was thinking, why not upgrading the whole system? So originally I was planning to only upgrade the motherboard, but while I was doing so, it turned out I need a second computer anyways, so I decided to go for a brand new SSD, a new case, and I also added a graphics card. So what I will be changing on the system today is the case, the motherboard, add an msata SSD drive, and add a GTX 1060 6GB. Originally I was thinking to do something like a magic trick, like this is how it was and this is how it became, but since I saw The Verge how to build a gaming PC video, I decided to do a voiceover after the building. It won't be an in-depth tutorial, more like a basics or guidelines. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's start with the disassembly. Immediately after opening the case, you can see what a mess I had inside as a computer. The first thing I do, unplug the hard drives and the SSD and remove all the cabling from the motherboard. Then remove the power supply and quickly unscrew all the motherboard screws and remove the whole thing in the same time. After this, most of the system is disassembled. After this, just take out the RAM from the motherboard, unplug the CPU fan and remove the 4 holdings for the CPU cooler itself. After all this, a nice cleaning for all the components outside. Please forgive me, I do not have a camera to record all of this, so I can only show you a picture after all was done. Before the reassembly, I can show the new star of the show, the Gigabyte GA-Z77P-D3 motherboard, which supports our CPU and is allowing us to overclock it. It also features 4 DIMM slots and an mSATA slot for onboard SSD, which is not gonna be faster than the normal SSD, but it's 2 less cables in the cable management issue. The one I have chosen is a 120 gig mSATA SSD from Kingston. Let's start the assembly. The first thing I'm gonna install is the CPU. To install it correctly, make sure you align the golden triangle on the CPU with the motherboard's marking. The next component to install is the DDR3 RAM, which I have 2 x 8 GB. Yes, they are different, but they work, so it is fine. And to operate them in dual channel, usually you have to install them in the 2nd and the 4th slot from the CPU. Next, I will apply the thermal compound, which is the Arctic MX4. A little blob is perfectly fine, you can even see me applying a little bit too much. Next, I'm installing the CPU cooler, which I think is a Hyper 212 from Cooler Master, but I'm not entirely sure. If you know which one it is, please leave a comment down below. Plug in the fan and voila! The next thing I'm gonna install is the mSATA SSD, which can only go in one way to its slot, and by a little click you can know that it's installed correctly. And the last thing to do on the motherboard, since it came without a battery, I have to install a battery. It's a very cheap thing, it's like half a USD. Next we have come to the case. I'm using the Deepcool Tesseract Blue SW version without a window. This case supports up to 7 120mm fans. 2 on the side panel, 2 on the top, 1 in the back, which is already pre-installed, 1 by the hard drive base and 1 in front of the case. This case features 3 bays for 5-inch optical drives, which I find completely overkill for 2018, 3 x 2.5 inches for SSDs and 4 x 3.5 inch for normal hard drives. Older hard drives you can install without using a single screw. Let's get on with our build. The first thing I'm gonna install into the new case is not the brace, it's the I/O shield, because that's how it's called. After this, I'm installing the motherboard using all the screws included. After this I will go with the power supply, but I try to show you. On the bottom of the case, those are not insulation pads that prevent short-circuiting the PSU. Those are there for sound insulation. After that, I'm installing the PSU and routing out all the cables to the back of the case. Although this case doesn't have a window, I'm still routing all the front I/O cables to the back to give it a nice look. I am selecting all the cables I'm not gonna need, tie them up loosely and hide them in one of the hard drive bays. I am connecting the CPU cable to the motherboard, which unfortunately is a little bit too short, so it has to go through the motherboard. Next, the 24-pin motherboard connector. Next, I'm connecting the front I/O cables, which are luckily labeled on the motherboard itself, so I don't have to use the manual. Installing my single 1TB hard drive into the plastic case doesn't require any screws, and you just slide it into the case. Going to the back of the case, do some cable management. And this case comes with plenty of zip ties, so you don't have to worry if you waste one or two of them. To provide a better airflow, I will install a 120mm case fan on the side panel itself to push air directly onto the CPU and the VRAM. After all this was done, I could boot up the system and load into the Chinese BIOS. As you might have noticed, I didn't include a video card, because that time I didn't have one extra. But since then I managed to upgrade my main rig to a 1070, so I can install the GTX 1060 6GB Superclocked edition from EVGA. After a fresh copy of Windows, I was running a couple of tests to see how well our 3770k performs. At first I ran all the tests at stock speeds, and after that I overclocked it to 4.3 GHz, which was a very simple overclock since I didn't have to change the core voltage or anything else, just a core clock multiplier. And to put it against something, I have tested my Ryzen 7 1700 at 3.7 GHz, and I also simulated a Ryzen 5 1500X also on 3.7 GHz. The first test I ran was Cinebench A15 with a stock point of 675. Once overclocked, we can see a 15% increase in performance, where the single core performance actually beats the Ryzen 7 1700. A very similar story in V-Ray, where we saw a 15% decrease in the completion time once overclocked, and also very similar results in Corona benchmark, with a 14% reduction in the completion time. So much from productivity. Let's jump into some games to see how well it performs. Unluckily, I only had time to retest two games, which is Fortnite and PUBG. So in Fortnite, on Epic settings we averaged at 86 FPS with a 1% low of 50.6 FPS. And with PUBG, everything set to ultra, we averaged 62.7 FPS with a 1% low of 20.3, but please keep in mind PUBG has a very poor optimization, to say at least. All the other benchmark records I've been taking from the previous video, since they were done just a couple of months ago and these games didn't change a lot since then. So, conclusion time. The mSata SSD is a very nice addition to our PC. It keeps it fast, simple, and most importantly takes away two cables from the case. The GTX 1060 6GB I think is one of the best 1080p graphics cards at the moment. The Deepcool Tesseract case provides us with plenty of space, lots of case fan options, and it comes at a very decent price for around 40 USD. And most importantly, the 3770k still holds up even against the newer architecture of Ryzen CPUs. As for the whole PC in general, it will play all AAA games at high or very high details at 60 frames per second. It will play obviously any esports title with moderate settings at 144Hz or above. And as for content creation, this PC still holds up against the much newer Ryzen architecture as well. Yes, you might not gonna get the fastest results in 4K rendering, but it will still do the job just fine. As for this video, thank you very much for watching. If you would like to subscribe, you can do it here. Or if you would like to watch another video, you can do it here. My name is Barney. Thank you so much for watching and see you guys in the next video.